Okay, here we are. I have my friend David Russo, who was referred to me by his father, Pasquale Russo. So, David, you and I have met a few times, and perhaps we could start off by introducing yourself, and then just we can kind of take it from there.
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Ron. Excited to be a part of this time capsule conversation. Um, yeah, my name is David Russo, and grown up pretty much in Southern California my whole life. So San Diego native since I'm about 10 years old. Um, Went to school, high school here, went to Santa Fe Christian, graduated, started out going to Azusa Pacific for business. um, had a come to Jesus moment there that was kind of the definitive turning point in my life, right? I tell people uh, it was kind of the grace of God that let me hit rock bottom really early on in life. I had about a 6 month phase of trying to walk away from Jesus, and that leading to a lot of just darkness, depression, questions, existential angst, and had a pretty profound mystical encounter when I was about 18 years old that was really, for me at least, a 180, a 180 that set me on a course that I haven't walked perfectly, but it definitely was a change of course. So after that, I went to Bible college in Murrieta, met my wife there, started working in churches, eventually went back to seminary, did a master's in Christian leadership, and am now doing a doctorate in spiritual formation and spiritual direction, as well as having a baby in the last 9 months and starting up a nonprofit. So this is a moment in my life that definitely has a lot of simultaneous balls in the air right now. I'm juggling these things, but I'm really excited to get into any conversation with you because they always lead to exciting, unexpected places. So.
Well, maybe we could step back and talk about what was that transformation? What triggered it? And we can see as we talk what happened. But what
Yeah.
was the start?
Yeah. Well, the start was a pain. I would say a lot of pain of like I was saying, pursuing things that I thought my parents or my family or my church was keeping me away from, these pleasures of life and experimenting with drugs and just promiscuity and every experience, had the smallest temporary high with a long season kind of regret afterwards and really was at a crisis because I wasn't finding any consolation in church. I didn't have a really strong or true connection with God in any sense. And so as I turned to kind of hedonism, um, I found that that was empty too. And so that left me, with basically no options. So the moment for me though was really praying in this little kind of corner unit they had inside of the dorms I was in. They had these end of the hallway kind of study rooms,
Hmm.
and it was probably 1 or 2 in the morning one night. I just went into there and basically, told God that I think I've train wrecked my life, but if you can do anything with it, it's all yours. Um, and I meant that as much as I could mean it at the time. As much as I knew what that meant, I did mean it. And um, the sense was that God came into the room. I don't really have a better way to describe it, but he went from being like a concept to a presence. It changed from this idea about what God is like to an encounter with who God is. And the sense was just pure grace, love, and forgiveness. And um, that's been a constant reminder for me because as there's moments where I question, the character of God or the nature of God, it's very helpful for me to remember that God revealed himself to me as grace and love and forgiveness at the time when I would judge myself to be doing the absolute worst in every area, morally, ethically, spiritually. I was at lowest on every metric, and that's when he came with grace and love and forgiveness. And if that's how he revealed himself to me, at my lowest, how much more so, as I attempt to walk with him, is that his same character and nature towards me today. But that was the turning point. And actually, I think it was the very next morning. Um, my mom, who's pretty prophetic, she has just a real sense of God's voice. She called me and she says, "Do you think that you have the discerning of spirits?" And I didn't even know what that phrase was, that verse was, but I just began to weep, um, because I knew something had kind of been given to me through that experience with connecting with God the night before. And for the next couple weeks, as I was going around the college campus, I would have this sense of kind of knowing things to pray for people. I started to realize that I had a sense of other people who were in a state of depression, even though outwardly they could look happy and you know um, normal. I was developing this sense of a spiritual discernment, um, and yeah, that's the beginning, I guess, for
So
me.
how old were you at that point, David?
I think I was 18, probably going on 19. I think 18. Yeah,
18,
18.
going on 19, and how old are
Yeah,
you now?
I'm 33. Yeah,
So in the years that passed from 18 to 33,
yeah.
has your community of friends changed from 18 to 33?
Oh yeah. I mean, that was within a couple of weeks actually of that experience. I knew that I couldn't stay at that school. Just personally, it felt like too strong of a temptation for me. I had a completely, you know, different set of friends than those that would have helped me in my new walk with Jesus. And so I left that school and just began to work. I was working at a Panera Bread, and reading my Bible and praying kind of for hours every day. I wanted to be like a monk.
Hmm.
Um, I was, getting really into Francis of Assisi and these other. Again, I didn't know any of these terms. My church vocabulary was very limited, but I was drawn to a lot of the mystics and contemplatives without knowing that's what they were or that we would call them that. Um, and just having these kind of profoundly personal moments with Jesus. And during that time, I was praying, uh, God, what do you want me to do? Because at the time, my highest ambition was just to drive around America in a minivan and tell people about Jesus. I was
Hmm.
doing a lot of evangelism at the time, like street evangelism. And eventually, my dad connected me with a friend of his, a missionary friend, that connected me to Calvary Chapel Bible College. And he basically said, if you want to go around telling people what the Bible says, you should probably know what it says, So I thought that made enough sense for me. So yeah, after about 6 months of being in between um, Azusa and that transition, that experience, um, I enrolled and went to Calvary Chapel Bible College.
Wow. So, okay, so you're
Yeah,
18 and
yeah,
you had this moment. Did you share that with your mom, who you say is prophetic? And did you
yeah.
share it with your dad in terms of what you had gone through?
Years later, definitely, I shared more of the experience, like I'm sharing with you now. I didn't share that full story I just shared with you until years later, but I do remember, yeah, sharing with them that I had a profound turn, and they could see it in me, as I was coming home from school, that my interests were definitely different than they were before. Yeah,
Well, when as a parent myself and as a grandpa myself and as a great grandpa myself, it's sometimes difficult when you see your child suffering. And it's fine line between enabling and just the different ways of dealing with your children whom you love. How did your mom and dad um, travel alongside you while you were going through the dark part of your life, and then coming to the light, as it were? How in reflecting back on those days, how did they assist you? Was it by words? Was it by deeds? What's your recollection?
Yeah, I think they've been very supportive. I'm more of a personal person as it is, so I have a harder time, I think, opening up. And through deeds and through lack of what they didn't say, actually, I think is a way of showing support sometimes too, is, you know, I saw it as, definitely a failure to leave Azusa going for the degree I was going for and just dropping out and wanting to go around, you know, preaching the Bible and then eventually going to Bible college. Like on external metrics, it's like I definitely took a big step down. And the fact that they didn't kind of condemn me for that or shame me or judge me for that, I think is a lot of proof of support in and of itself. And then also supporting me to be able to go to Bible college and do ministry. Um, yeah, they are extremely supportive and walked me through that season really well.
Did they offer any advice? You indicated sounds like you're kind of a private person. Um, were they able to uh, assist you in any conversational ways, or was that something that you just knew you wanted to do on your own, being the
Yeah.
self-actualizing kind of person that you are?
Yeah, I don't, yeah, it is probably some self-actualizing. I think that a lot of support came just from the fact that we were able to have conversations about God that we weren't able to before. Um, so my dad baptized me. That's uh, that's a really major moment there.
Wow, when did that
Yeah,
happen?
that was probably a few months after, yeah, the conversion experience. So somewhere in I forget, so 2009 maybe. Yeah. So we were definitely, yeah, that there was a strong reconnection, I think, with me and my family because we now had that spiritual foundation in common, whereas it wasn't really active for me for a lot of high school and middle school. Um, and yeah, there definitely was a strong reconnection there. And as much as I think as I would open up, they were definitely willing to step in.
So talk about that baptism. I can just imagine as a father what he must have felt. Uh,
Yeah.
what about from the son's perspective? How did you feel?
It felt, yeah, very redemptive. I think that's, one of the magics of baptism, the power of it is there was, yeah, just a sense of really starting off on a fresh foot, a new, a new beginning to something. And um, yeah, to have that even with my dad was extremely special. Um, to say in a way like our father-son relationship, I think was being reborn in that time as well.
Hmm. Hmm. That's so neat that you had that experience, that joy that you went through. So, mental health is such a difficult subject to talk about. And as you've expressed to me in the past, I'm the kind of person that likes to break through the ice, as you've so appropriately characterized my personality. So, in being true to that that reputation, David,
Yeah. Yeah.
How would you suggest to other people your age or younger or older for that matter, uh, deal with those inner self-talk words that you perhaps might have gone through while you were
Mhm.
in that dark phase of life? What would you suggest to those people in terms of finding the light or going towards the light?
Yeah, it's definitely a ongoing battle. I don't think that wasn't a silver bullet moment. It definitely it reset the it reset the table. Um, yeah, but the fight definitely continues. So I'm not saying I'm speaking whatever I'm going to say now out of a sense of like arrival or mastery that I've got, perfect mental health. I definitely don't. But a few things that have been helpful for me. One book, The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness by Tim Keller. It's a short little book that was, um, I think, taken from a sermon of his. But the idea is a lot of our problems come from just thinking about ourselves, period. So whether we're thinking too highly of ourselves or too lowly of ourselves, they're kind of they both share the same root, which is just an obsession with self in general. And kind of like you said, that self-actualizing personality that I have is I'm very performance driven. I do like to, accomplish things. And I think the strongest microscope is turned inwards for people like me. So I'm much more critical of myself than I would be to a friend. That's a good reminder too, is the things that you say to yourself, would you say them to a friend or someone that you love? Um, but the freedom of self-forgetfulness, uh, it showed me that there's not there is this kind of promise of discovery that introspection offers us, I think, and it never fully satisfies. Um, this promise, if I just dig deep enough down, I'm gonna find some, rosebud, if you know Citizen Kane, or like so, again, a
Mhm.
silver bullet, something that's just gonna crack open my mental health and it's just gonna be forever changed. But I actually think we come to know ourselves best through others' eyes, um, in the same way that our loved ones, the people that we do open up to more than anybody else, they can usually tell things about us that we don't know. And I think that's true on a hyper level with God. The idea that God has perfect insight into who we are on the deepest level. And so not inviting him into that process of trying to figure out what's going on inside of you, I think is foolish. Um, so for me, the image that came to bring this all home was uh, understanding that a baby actually doesn't have a sense of self apart from the gaze of their mother and father when they're really young. So the sense of a self identity isn't really formed in a child till a little later in life. But all of their sense of self comes from basically the expression that their parents are giving them.
Mm.
I think that is so true on a spiritual level. As far as mental health goes, is um, our sense of self has to be grounded outside of ourselves. Yeah.
So I
And
guess the question would naturally be then, where does that come from? Does it come from the friends that you surround yourself with? Does it come from your readings? Uh, how can you balance the self-awareness with having friends around you give feedback if you ask for it anyway,
yeah,
that can alter the inner dialogue of self-talk that might be negative or pessimistic or unhopeful,
yeah,
particularly during times of struggle and stress and challenges because
Mm,
that's just part of life. So
yeah.
how did you and how would you help
Mm,
another person that was in a similar place as you are? Did you have
yeah.
other people aside from your mom and dad to interact with uh, as you transition from that 18, 19, 20-year-old person to where you are now?
Yeah, I think I've been very blessed to always have a really strong sense of community. As soon as I made that change when I was 18,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, I've never been without a good, um, healthy community around me, and I know that's completely the grace of God, but also different mentors that have come into my life. I've been very, very blessed by people who are much wiser and seasoned than I am to pour their time into me, in addition to my parents, like you said. But I think at the end of the day, no friends and family and our communities at best should reinforce like our identity, but they shouldn't form it, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that's reserved for God. So to circle back to that question, I think it has to be found in a personal connection with Jesus. So that I'm a real big fan of the quote that says it's I think Pascal says, all of man's problems comes from his inability to sit in a room quietly for 1 hour. And I
Hmm.
think there's a lot of wisdom there because as soon as we're truly alone and truly silent, because we could be alone a lot of the time but not silent, or we could be quiet but not really still. But when we're really in solitude, silence, and stillness, when those three things are there, I think it's almost impossible not to kind of confront the inner darkness, but also to find God. I think that's why Jesus was constantly pulling away from crowds and having to be searched out because he was recentering his identity in the eyes of God alone. And when we do that, we have a better um, acid test for when our friends or family are either reinforcing that identity or not, even the closest people. So like Peter, one of the closest friends of Jesus, in one moment is reinforcing the identity of Christ, saying, you are the Son of God, you are the Messiah. And in the next moment, he's saying, far be it from you that you should die. You shouldn't go to the cross. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. So within the span of a few minutes, a very close friend that has, personal access to Jesus could be reinforcing or trying to deconstruct his identity because Peter was imposing his identity for Christ on him. And I think personally, it's the same thing is if we don't have time alone, with God alone, just us and him, we won't really have a good test of knowing if our friends and family and community is reinforcing or deconstructing our
Hmm.
true identity. Yeah.
Well, here's a question that is a Ron Kimura existential question of is our relationships a function of providential
Mm.
or predestination?
Yeah. I'd say, what would you say the difference between those two words are?
That's the question.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Providence and predestination.
Providential, where you might say it's a coincidence that you and I happen to know
Mm.
Mario. Is
Yeah.
that providential or is that predestination?
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably another both and. I think it
Well,
might be a both and.
one of the things that I wanted to ask, I believe that gratitude and gratefulness is an important part of joy and happiness in life. And it's a habit of mine to daily figure out what am I grateful for. So I'd like to ask the question, what are you grateful for today?
Yeah, I truly am grateful for this conversation. Every time we meet, it does lead to, yeah, better places. But I'm very grateful, yeah, for my family, my daughter who was born 9 months ago. Um, I'm
What's her
so
name?
grateful. Viviana, yeah, my wife Kimberly. Um, I think yeah, a good habit I'm trying to form is to remember that yeah, the best parts of my life are usually the closest to home, not these things that I go out to achieve or try to make happen, but yeah, the some of the greatest gifts are right in front of your nose. Um, yeah, so my family, I'm very grateful for them.
And what's your hope for your daughter who's she's 6 months old, did you say?
She's 9 months. Yeah,
9 months
9 months.
old.
Yeah.
So what would your hope be for her in
Mm.
say 20 years?
My hope would be that she would know that the truest and most central part of her identity is being a beloved daughter of God, and that she would, yeah, find her worth in that, her value in that, um, her sense of purpose in that.
Um, and what about your bride? What's your hope for her?
It would be C, C previous. Yeah, but also that she would know, yeah, how, yeah, just truly how much she contributed to our family, um, in thankless ways, you know, that she would feel really honored and valued by me and her family. Yeah.
What would you say to her that expresses your thankfulness and gratefulness that you may or may not have said? Maybe you're the
Yeah.
kind of person that is able to verbalize
Mm.
your thoughts, what you think.
Yeah.
But I also get a sense that the private person that you are
Mm.
may not allow you to verbalize that. So is there anything that has been left unsaid
Yeah.
that if she was sitting here on this interview that you would want to say to her?
I'm grateful to say I think it's been said, but I would say it again that yeah, she is my best friend, and it's definitely been a rock throughout our marriage. Um, yeah.
How are you career wise now? Let's pivot a little bit to your nonprofit.
Yeah.
And you want to talk a little bit and maybe give a description and a mission statement of what you want to accomplish with your talents,
Mm.
treasures, and time?
Yeah. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, we like I said, I didn't know that I was drawn to the mystics and drawn to the contemplatives. I found out later in life that a lot of the books that were slowly stacking up on my bookshelf were coming from that angle. I'm a really big fan of Dallas Willard and John Ortberg and Richard Foster, the Renovari group, um, who kind of popularized the need for spiritual formation in churches. Um, and a lot of my work has been, yeah, in churches and around nonprofit ministries for most of my life since I was 18. And I've seen a lot of health and unhealth, and the biggest determining factor, I think, is an ongoing cultivated relationship with Jesus. And there's there's two sets of metrics we can look at, I think, for the health of any ministry. There's the numeric, but then there's the spiritual health metrics. And I think one of them has some more eternal value than the other. Um, but the nonprofit basically came about through a YouTube search one day where I was looking for just basic search terms on Christian practices. So tying it into spiritual formation, I was curious just what content was popular on social media in these categories. So I typed in things like how to pray, how to spend time with God, how to read your Bible. And as I was going through the search results for each of these different search terms, I was scrolling down and noticing that on any one of the videos I could click on for the first page or couple pages of results, on the biggest streaming, biggest video platform in the world on YouTube, almost without exception, the majority of all the videos fit into one of two formats, and it was either one, a pre-recorded sermon, so it was a single angle camera focused on a stage where a pastor was, talking about how to spend time with God, how to pray, how to read your Bible. Maybe they cut that sermon up into smaller clips, so they were, 8-minute clips of a sermon. Or the second format was someone sitting like I am right now behind a computer screen and saying, "Hey, I'm David Russo, and here's 5 ways you can learn to pray." And then it was basically a PowerPoint presentation. And the the thought, it may have been inspired, it may have been just an aha. I think it might have been a bit of providence and predestination working together. But the thought was, the message is out there, but the messaging is wrong, or the messaging is outdated, I would say. So I don't have anything negative to say about anybody who's putting anything out into the world, to lift up the name of Jesus. Uh, the the aha moment for me though was to say, is this the format or the way of speaking or the way of messaging that people are used to encountering when they're coming on these social media platforms, or does this type of format feel out of sync with the other formats that they're encountering? And it felt like a pretty big yeah.
And you're targeting what age group?
Yeah. I I personally am an intergenerational fan. I don't think the church is served very well when we focus on one age group to the exclusion of the other. I think
Mm.
we're better together. Um, so I'd hope our videos would span, across the ages as well as they can. Um, our format is, we're calling it more cinematic. So that's kind of like a sub-genre in social media, as they call it, kind of cinematic content. And so it's basically the highest quality type of cameras that we can afford, and the best sound design that we can get, and filming in beautiful locations, and getting lighting set up. So it's not lo-fi is like another term. Like lo-fi would be someone just walking around with an iPhone and kind of filming themselves. We're trying to really make them high production value, high produced, so that I think that type of content goes across ages a bit better than maybe like a handheld TikTok vlog or something like that. But we're definitely, you know, going after the people who are on social media the most, which statistically is definitely the younger generations. There's a strong connection between the younger you are, and the amount of hours you spend on screen time. Um, so, you know, and if like by default, we're going after the people who are on their screens the most and on social media the most, which is more and more young people.
So do you have a template then in terms of how long your films are and then the specific uh, content? Do you deal in storytelling, uh, parables? And then, of course, you're the brains behind the operation, as it were. So you are involved in the writing and the production aspect. Is that right?
Yeah, I hope I'm not the ultimate brains behind it, but I'm I'm partnering with the brains behind it. I pray. And yes, the messaging, we're trying to be more poetic than propositional. It's one of
Hmm.
the phrases that we
What's
talk
the
about
difference
in the team.
between those two?
Absolutely. So a proposition is basically a logical statement to agree with or not agree with. You know, poetry is more abstract. It's a bit more conceptual. Um, it speaks to, the parts of ourselves that include our logic, but also go beyond our logic. So I would call it supra-rational, meaning that it doesn't you know, speak down or condemn our rational minds, but it just admits that there's certain things that our rational minds can't fully comprehend, and yet they're real. So for us, one of the core values is beauty. Um, yeah, beauty is something that has an ability to just leapfrog, I think, right over our logic. We don't know why we sigh and exhale when we see a beautiful sunset, but something in us is overwhelmed, or a sense of, God in nature, where you just feel this expansiveness and you can't really describe to someone what's going on, but you're aware of a real experience that's happening. Um, and so, poetic, not propositional. We believe that people are bombarded with propositions all the time. Advertisements are propositions. You should buy this because it will make you X.
Hmm.
You should subscribe here because you will feel Y. Those are propositions where um, poetry kind of looks at concepts through a slant angle. It kind of looks at it from just off of center. And we believe, Jesus in the parables did this in a lot of ways. That the parables are poetic. They're images that have the ability to linger with us because they're not just propositions. Um, we can get a lot of propositions out of them, but the parables, I think the reason why that they have that sticky quality is because they're so imaginative, and there's a lot you could read into them if you look at them over and over again. And poetry is like that, where a math equation, you come back to it and it's going to give you the same thing every time. It's going to give you the same 2 + 2 = 4 every time you look at it. But if you come back to a parable or a poem over and over, it'll give you more and more. You know?
Is there a action step within the template of how you present your concept?
Yeah, like the way that we make sure that concept is fitting in that value, you mean, or
Yes.
yeah. Um, yeah, so we have a set of values that we try to run everything through. So it's beauty, peace, simplicity, and wisdom. And so we ask ourselves, as we're crafting these stories, and especially when I'm writing them, does it give a sense of awe and wonder? Beauty. Is it getting at this concept of God being um, awe-inspiring? Is God beautiful? Is God made beautiful through this language? Is it peaceful? So does it build a bridge? And it's not peacekeeping, it's peacemaking. Is it helping to build a bridge of peace between people who don't know God and those who do? Um, is it simple? So is it not trying to be too, high on its horse and too intellectual or too fancy? Is it is it you know, um, possible for someone very, very new in their faith or exploring faith to get at some of these concepts without having background knowledge? But then wisdom is the final one, which is the counterbalance to simplicity. And we came up with both of those values together because they 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 counteract each other in a good way. Where we want it to be deep, we want there to be real, rich spiritual wisdom in there, but we want to try to present that richness in as simple of terms as we can. And again, it hopefully all those things are grounded in Jesus style. The way that Jesus would do it is he spoke extremely profound truths, but kids could understand him. Um, and yet they can be understood on uh, multiple levels.
So
Yeah.
who makes up your team that puts the finished product together?
Yeah. So we have me. Tim is our kind of cinematic expert. He's the videographer and he helps with editing. So me and him both do the filming and editing together. And then musician, worship pastor Brian does all the scoring and he'll work on the narrations for the videos. And then Jared is our kind of nonprofit uh, production consultant. He's helped me produce a couple podcasts, and he's been in the Christian media space for a couple years now. So he also helps consult on like the direction and vision kind of production of the videos. And then each of our collaborators. So the the unique thing about what we're doing is kind of like you said earlier, I'm a bit more of a private person, but what that's led to in our films is that we actually do a lot of interviewing work with just people who we think are walking with Jesus in
Hmm.
interesting ways. And so the scripts that I will write will come off of interviews with them.
Hmm.
So I'll start the process by doing what you're doing with me right now is trying to drill beneath the ice with them. And then I'll discover some really interesting concepts about how they connect with God um, through all these different avenues of life, and then turn that into a script that honors our values of beauty, peace, simplicity, and wisdom.
So how do you, with the finished product then, David, how do you monetize if that's your goal, or is it more altruistic and just part of what your mission statement is of your team, your nonprofit?
Yeah. Uh, I'm always a mission first person and then money second. That's just the way I'm wired is a lot of my heroes were uh, homeless people. Chief among was Jesus.
Hmm.
So I'll admit that, yeah, I try to put business always behind, the mission as much as we possibly can. But it is something we have to think about to stay sustainable and to keep doing this. So right now we're doing it mainly just as a fundraising structure. If if the content reaches a point where it can be monetized, there's other or monetized more heavily. There are definite ways we could do that. Um, we believe though that Christian content it's going to start out uh, under the gun a bit more than other things. If we were starting a channel on how to be healthy, wealthy, and successful, cinematically, I think we would probably have some better SEO pretty quick.
Well,
That's
there's a
not,
lot of
yeah,
podcasts out there on so many different
yeah,
subjects. If somebody wanted to support your
yeah,
mission, how would they go about supporting you? Do you write grants, or
yeah,
are you open to people supporting you? Your uh, either 501(c)(3) or however
yeah,
you're structured. Is there
yeah.
a website that you have?
Yes. Thanks, Ron. So abidingpractice.com has everything on there. And we are partnered with a nonprofit covering. It's called The Cause, and so they act as it's called a fiscal sponsor. And so under their umbrella, there's about 80 kind of micro nonprofits like ours is, and they help with all the accounting, making sure that we're above board on how we're doing everything, and provide you know an accountability structure to make sure that we're uh, following the vision that we set out to follow and that we're doing it ethically and well. And they are on our website as well. So if you're on abidingpractice.com, you can just go to support or give, and there'll be a link there. And then also for people who, if they don't want the tax write-off, they can donate through Patreon as well. We have a Patreon channel under the same name, Abiding Practice. But um, yeah, those would be the two ways.
So, this question that I would ask, what do you want to do with your life? I would imagine that based on the couple of different topics we talked about, that each one of them is something you want to do with your life. How would you first define success? Uh,
Yeah.
what is your general concept of what David Russo's definition of success in life is?
Yeah. Well, there's competing narratives, I think, in all of our heads, right? And so, uh, yeah, success as it's spoken to me from a secular culture would be, uh, more impact, more influence, more profit, all of these things, and more reach, more audience. Um, those things are easy to quantify and define. But I would say the true success for me would be to say, did I do it with God? Whatever I do it. Did I do it with Him?
Hmm.
I felt actually uh, kind of convicted to write that down in my journal the other day to say anything that's done for God that's not done with Him counts for very little, if
Hmm.
not nothing. So all the things that we do for God in the name of God, if they aren't done with God, do they really hold any value at all? Yeah.
Well, uh, this question uh, is a bit difficult um, to articulate in a way, particularly in light of of your perspective. How will you measure your life? How will in the various areas of your life, being a husband, being a father,
Mm,
being a uh, producer of
mm,
content, as a follower of Jesus, how will you measure a life at at the end in another 60 years?
yeah. I hope to be like Paul one day and say I don't even judge myself anymore. And I hope I leave that measuring up to God. But my my question for myself is, am I doing whatever I'm doing with God or not? And the more moments that I can string together of that being true, that's success for me.
Well, the the time capsule aspect that we've talked about, uh, and the mantra that we've talked about before is blessed are those that plant seeds for trees under whose shade they'll never sit. In a way, some of your content will be planting seeds for trees under whose shade you'll never sit.
Mm,
Uh, if you are going to give a message to those people
mm,
who you might never meet, and they ask the question, who is David Russo? And why did you do what you're doing? Why did you do and produce the product that you produced? What would your answer be?
I would hope it'd just be that he was a very thankful, follower of Jesus. Uh, that's those would be the words I want on a tombstone. Just thank you, Jesus. You know, that yeah, whatever I'm doing would be out of a response to his love. Yeah,
Well, there's a lot more drilling we could do,
yeah,
David, but we'll bring it to a close for this session. You never know. Maybe we'll have to do a part two, part three. I'm going to hopefully have an opportunity to have a conversation with your dad.
yeah,
So depending upon how that goes and so forth, maybe we could after I have a conversation with him. Maybe we'll have to have a father-son conversation. That might be interesting for your children's sake and your children's children's sake. So they'll be able to see two generations of Russos and see what's the similarities between David Russo and Pasquale Russo.
We'll see. Could be scary. Thanks, Ron.
Okay, David.
Appreciate you.
Thanks a lot for your time and for your transparency and for all that you do for the kingdom.
Thank you.